A little absent for a while. Um, just been busy. Almost didn't make it tonight, but we are here. We are out here. So let's get into it. It's late, so doing late night philosophy. See how long this lasts. Let me switch my chat filter so I can see everyone in the chat room who pops up. Um, if anyone feels so inclined, please, if you find this interesting or you learn something or you just want to support the cause, um, you can please donate to the super chat. If you're watching this on replay, you're not watching this live. Super thanks. Any donation is appreciated. Whether it's 1 cent or 1,000 is all good to me. That 1 cent will go to my next uh, fruit snack or or Happy Meal, or you can hit me up on uh, uh, Cash App, or you can buy me a coffee, and I do drink coffee. It's not a gimmick. Like I literally will drink coffee. So, like I said, just getting that out the way preliminarily. So please feel free to donate to this super chat or the super thanks. Um, super chat if you're here with me live now. Super thanks if you're watching this after it's already been recorded. Or you can go to my links in my description where I have my Cash App and buy me a coffee. So hello to everyone in the chat room. Um, so like I said, it's late night, so I'm not gonna stay on long. Just wanted to converse a little bit about religion. As you know, we've just had a major religious holiday. Well, holidays. We had Passover, then we had Easter, both Easter Sunday and Easter Monday for Orthodox people of the Orthodox faith. And on that Easter Monday, unfortunately, uh, Pope Francis passed away. Um, and he's been considered somewhat of a more progressive pope than in the past, and I think he is more well liked than his predecessor. So, yeah, I had some. So I looked into it a little bit. I had some revelations, I guess you could call it. Pun intended. Not that I've switched from being atheist to religious. It hasn't gone that far, but I have seen some upsides to Christianity, and I just wanted to just kind of discuss whether religion can be justified generally. I mean, of course, we can talk about Christianity, but this isn't just about Christianity, but just religion overall. So, one of the things that I've come to realize earlier this week, well, last week now because it's Sunday here where I am, but one of the things I came to learn was that, the idea that Jesus was merely a mythical figure is not widely accepted within the historian community. Um, it's actually considered a fringe theory. I didn't know that. So I didn't know that most historians, do accept that there was a there was an actual historical Jesus, um, not just the biblical one. Uh, and I found out that some of the people who've been pushing the idea that he was merely a mythical figure uh, are considered that's considered a fringe theory. I didn't know that. I was like, okay, because I was like, well, the historicity is really hard to establish with him, but that is the case for a lot of historical figures from antiquity. Antiquity meaning ancient times, right? Because you just you can have the same doubts about other historical figures of antiquity like Socrates or Plato and Aristotle and Cleopatra, um, Alexander the Great, stuff like that. But for the most part, we do take that those folks actually existed. So it is the case with Jesus. The problem is that when it comes to religion, um, sometimes there's a blending of fiction and fact, so that sometimes you don't know whether something is historically accurate or not. Like, say for instance, there's debate, whether Buddha was a actual person, uh, whether Lao Tzu was a actual person who was the founder of Taoism, whether Confucius was an actual person who established Confucianism, whether Hote was an actual person. Hote was a Chinese Buddhist monk who was he himself worshipped as a deity. And then of course, even within the Judeo-Christian framework, a lot of the characters have been some of the well, I would say many. I think it's less controversial to say that many of the people of the Old Testament were mythical, like Moses and the Davidian line of kings. So Jake says the Pope died after saying to stop the war. Sounds like he was given a glass of spicy water. In the Vatican, I highly doubt it. They have their own in the Vatican. They have their own police force. These guys, I think they're Swedish, the gendarme, which is they're like they're like an elite bodyguard slash police force that works within the Vatican. Yeah, you're not going to easily get to either the Pope or the cardinals within the Vatican. That's not happening. I don't. I highly doubt it. He was. Besides that, He was in his 80s. He was 80. I believe 88 years old. So I highly doubt that he died from poisoning and not just from age related disease as what happened to him. He was 88. So not everyone goes on to their 90s or to their hundreds. So um, people will not be soliciting money in my chat room. This person goes on timeout. But anyway, so um, by the way, for people who are new here, I'm not giving you shout outs or anything like that. If you want a shout out, pay me. You're gonna have to drop a super chat or a cash app. I don't do stuff for free for anyone anymore. You don't do stuff for free, nor do I. So I'm not giving any free shout outs. You can forget about it. If you go to any other major YouTuber during a live stream and you expect them to give you a shout out, you better you better drop something in their super chat for them. So, anywho, getting back to it. So like, yeah, so that was something that I found nice to learn right after Easter was the fact that Christ was an actual historical figure. So anywho, um, so like I said, we can get into a little bit of philosophy of religion. Just so far as talking about, can certain religious ideas be justified? So again, I'm not one of those militant atheists that believe that we should do away with religion. I think the religion is an important form of self-expression, um, in the likes of things like art and literature and music. However, I think it shouldn't go beyond that. Now, if people want to take, say, religion as also a guide to how they should live, again, I'm fine with that. It's a form of self-expression. Where it goes too far is where it becomes established as a political, mm, as part of a political system. That's when I have a problem with it, and I'm not sure if it can be justified on the grounds of being the basis for a political system, which is called a theocracy. Um, I can't read your name. Hold up, I might have to grab my glasses here because I can't read your username. I might just have to skip it because it's not sure if it's. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna just call you IS because I don't know how to read your. I don't. I'm not. I'm not sure how to read that username. But he says I don't know what to believe in. There are so many beliefs. Here's the thing: you don't have to choose. Oh, Ice Knight, a hobo. Okay, gotcha. Here's the thing: you don't actually have to choose a belief. It's always look. You can always choose to be agnostic on any set of beliefs. So it's often the case people think agnostic only refers to religion. Agnosticism refers to any sort of beliefs. Agnosticism just means you don't hold a strong opinion on a certain belief, either for or against. That's what agnosticism means. I mean, it literally means without knowledge. Ah, not or without nos, um, gnostic, belief or whatever. So that's all it is. So you don't have to choose what to believe. You can just simply choose not to hold any sort of strong belief whatsoever in any particular thing. Like your belief, your beliefs should be founded upon evidence and coherence with other rational beliefs. That's what your belief should be based on. But too often we hold beliefs for emotional reasons, cultural reasons, um, or simply as a matter of our upbringing when we haven't questioned those beliefs we were taught when we were younger. So, um, but yeah, to answer your question, I Snipe the Hobo, you don't have to choose any beliefs. You can let beliefs come to you naturally as you see them to be rational or not. And like I said, we judge the rationality of beliefs based on the evidence that supports them and their coherence with other rational beliefs, right? And that applies to religion as well. Now, there is a sort of uh, there's tension between sort of religious faith and rational beliefs because by definition, faith is belief without justification. However, you can still be an overall rational person while still holding religious beliefs because you may have those religious beliefs sort of um, modulated from your other more rational belief system, right? We see that a lot with a lot of intellectuals. There are a lot of intellectuals who were otherwise very religious people. I mean, look at the Pope himself. He held he was uh, I believe he had a master's in either chemistry or chemical engineering. The Pope, which is what I was telling one of my cousin-in-laws because he a few years ago he was undecided whether he wanted to go on to college or whether he wanted to go on to um, to maybe seminary school because his family was pushing him in that direction. I was like, dude, there's no reason why you can't do both. I was like, you can still go on to college if you want to pursue a STEM degree, and still later on, if you want to join the cloth, you can do that. I was like, look at the Pope. I was like, I said he has a significant science background, but he still ended up in the church. And he was like, oh, okay. So he went on to college. Now, after college, whether he goes on to still join to still take take his vows, or if he goes on to just lead a secular life, that's on him. But at least he gave himself the option, which was I think the good thing, the smart thing to do. Thank you, Piggy. Piggy says I subbed. I appreciate it a lot. Um, I Snipe said, "Yeah, I totally understand what you mean. It's just so crazy." Um, yes and no. I mean, I guess it can seem crazy because we live in an age where we're actually inundated with information in a way that we weren't 40, 30, 40, 50 years ago, where if you wanted to learn things, you had to make a conscious effort to do so. Uh, if you were a child of the 80s like myself, maybe you got it through encyclopedias because all of your parents were peer pressured into buying kids sets of encyclopedias from the supermarket or wherever where they were selling them. Yes, in the supermarket they were selling encyclopedias in the 80s. Ask your parents. um, or before then, you just have to go to the library. So that's what I did back then. We didn't have the World Wide Web. We had internet back in the 80s because people always say, how did y'all live back then without the internet? Look, we did have the internet. We just didn't have the web. The web didn't become commercially available until 1994. But but we had the web. But most people who had internet were, one, you had to have money because it was expensive, and two, you were probably very nerdy because the only thing you could do on the internet back in the 80s was either email or join one of those usernet groups. So unless you were chatting in one of the usenet groups or doing email, like there was really nothing else to do with internet back then. Just like cell phones, we had cell phones back then too, but they weren't smartphones. We didn't have smartphones until the 2000s, right? And they had smartphones before us overseas, back in Germany and Japan, before they came to America, because they didn't. and they didn't know how to market them here. Like the first smartphones I saw here were like the Palm Pilot phones. So take you back. Anyway, getting back to the subject. Jive AT5 says he was doing too much. Whom are you referring to? Are you referring to the previous Pope was doing too much? Because I don't think so. I mean, I didn't hear him. Like, he was progressive on some things, but he was still very traditional in many others. So he got criticism either way. He was criticized either for being too progressive, or he was criticized for not being progressive enough. It's like you can't win. I mean, because when your belief system is is based on a based on something that comes from over 2,000 years ago, um, it, you, you know, you can't win. So CT says when you chuck both of them together, religion and rationalism, you get this proper philosophical sausage sizzle. So I'm not talking about rationalism as far as, so let me be clear, because rationalism, I don't mean rationalism as far as the the certain philosophy, school of philosophy of rationalism, which is often the rival of empiricism. I'm not talking about rationalism in that sense. I was saying rational beliefs, not rationalism, which is a, like I said, a school of thought and philosophy um, that sets itself up as a type of way of acquiring knowledge, sometimes opposed to empiricism. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about rational beliefs as insofar as beliefs that are established on reason and evidence. That's all. Snipe says there's a song called "Dear Guide" by Dax. That song is awesome. You should listen to it one day. I don't even know who Dax is, so but yeah. So within philosophy, religion, I find a lot of people might find it interesting where there's a lot of arguments in philosophy of religion, philosophy of religion that per, that purport to establish the existence of God or certain faiths within within certain systems of religion. But I mean, I'm open to doing a rationalism versus empiricism on another day. I have no problem with that. It's just that might be a little dry for some people because they may not know what that even entails. You know, for the nuts, I'll just say, rationalism is the school of thought and philosophy, um, particularly in epistemology. Epistemology is the field of philosophy that deals with belief, knowledge, and rationality. And so, in epistemology, rationalism is the uh, is the theory of knowledge that claims that knowledge comes through reason alone, whereas empiricism says that knowledge comes um, through experience. Simon asked me, "Am I a Stoic?" No, that's an ancient philosophy that the only people who talk about being Stoics are really people who have read these little self-help books on Stoicism. Most people who study contemporary philosophy don't harp on Stoicism. Like that's an ancient Greek system. Most people in philosophy deal with contemporary philosophical issues, not with stuff from 3,000 years ago. So, sorry to say. Um, there's some things that I like about Stoicism in line with like because I find it some of it overlapping with Zen Buddhism or Chan Buddhism, whichever you prefer to call it. Um, but other than that, no, I'm not a Stoic, or at least I don't consider myself one. And again, to everyone in the chat room, hello again. Thank you for joining. Please sub if you haven't already, and share and like the video, please. It helps me out a lot. I Snipes says, "Sir, uh, kick the guy about Diddy who cares all about that junk." Um, yeah, I guess he is a troll. He can get a little time out. If you're gonna troll, drop a super chat because you're not gonna do it for free. So, as far as my thoughts on rationalism versus empiricism, I'll say this: in philosophy, it tends to swing one way or another. As I was coming up in philosophy, the pendulum was starting to swing back towards rationalism, but it goes back and forth. Pause between empiricism and rationalism. I, I like some of my professors. You can call me a brown nose if you want, but I agree. I agree with some of my professors who just choose to call themselves naturalists instead of either rationalists or empiricists. The naturalist basically says, I'm going to establish my epistemology on the uh, the knowledge that comes out of natural sciences, out of the natural sciences, or and social sciences for that matter, which obviously will both have knowledge that's acquired through both reason and through experience. So that's where I stand on that. John Major says, "What's the topic? The topic is this is just late night philosophy, talking about can we justify religion? Since we just had a couple of we've just had a string of religious holidays. We had Ramadan, I eat Mubarak, um, and Passover, then Easter, then the Pope passed away right after Easter. So I thought it'd be an interesting topic. CT says if they've got a 5-star review, a good chef, and the meats from a top butcher, pause, it's got to be good. He's using his noggin, logic, reason, and a bit of deduction without needing to chomp it first. CT says rationalism, smash the like for the speaker though. Appreciate it. So yeah, when like I said, um, one's religious beliefs, even if they are at odds with someone's otherwise other rational belief system, um, it again it doesn't have to be at it, there has been, like I said, there's been many intellectuals who've been able to sort of um, encapsulate their religious beliefs from the rest of their web of beliefs, so to speak. Um, like I said, we have people like Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was a very religious person, and I often thought he wasn't being religious enough, but at the same time, he was like atheist but religious at the same time. So I don't know how to explain that. only Wittgenstein himself could explain his how he was both religious and otherwise atheist at the same time. Um, who you've had people like St. Thomas Aquinas, who was otherwise a very rational person, but still had very hokey, made very hokey formal proofs to for the existence of God. Rene Descartes, who is the founder of modern philosophy, was still a very religious person. Like atheism is a non-profit organization. That is patently false. Atheism is just the common sense belief that God doesn't exist. That's it. Does it's not a movement. It's not an organization, which is what I had to. I got into a debate with a friend many years ago on this topic because he wanted to see atheism as a political movement. I'm like, why? Like, it's just a common sense belief. There's no need to turn it into like a political movement. But that's because he thought that we should eradicate religion. And I was like, well, I don't go that far. He was like, why not? He was like, the world would be better off without religion. I'm like, are you sure about that? Oh, it was a joke. I say. John Miz says I was a Christian for 26 years, but became an atheist over the last 4 years. Yeah, I mean, I became an atheist around the age of 20 uh, or 19. And it was just because I, I thought about it and I was just like, yeah, this doesn't, yeah, I don't think God exists. Because it was funny. I was actually reading a book on Bruce Lee's philosophy. For people who don't know, Bruce Lee, when he moved back to America as an adult, well, as a teenager or adult, whatever. I guess he was about 18. Um, I think he came back and graduated high school and then went on to go to school at the University of Washington in Seattle. He stayed till his junior year and he majored in philosophy. And it's very common for martial artists, by the way, to major in philosophy, which is probably why most of them are broke, like me. I'm a martial artist who also majored in philosophy, and I'm broke. So that's why I'm here on YouTube. But uh, so in this book written by John Little, it talked about a lot of Bruce Lee's personal beliefs, and something that I wasn't aware of was that he was atheist, which is funny because nowadays many people in China are atheists because that is the established belief system under under their government, right? We don't need to go too far into that because I don't want to get demonetized. But um, yeah, I never thought of him being either religious or non-religious, but to hear, but to see, these excerpts of what he thought, I was like, oh, I get it. And I thought about it for like a few days, and I was like, you know what? Bruce Lee is right. So, excuse me. So that's when I uh lost my religion. Well, I wasn't even religious by that point. I mean, I believed, but I didn't have any particular faith at that time. I was more of what you can call mm, a maybe a pantheist. Pantheist, like Spinoza. I think Spinoza is credited with being the first pantheist. Are people who basically believe in God, but believe God is just nature. So, and I believe Einstein might have been also a pantheist. It's hard to say because the way he talks, you don't know if he's just talking about God in a very in a metaphorical sense, or if he believes that God is nature, as did Baruch Spinoza did, which got him. excommunicated from the church. Jacksonville Kid says it's not bigotry if you call it religion. I don't get it. Uh, Term says most atheists don't really understand the true meaning and later discover they are actually agnostic. No, it's usually the other way around. Again, as I was saying earlier, agnostic just means you don't hold a particular belief. What you don't hold any strong view of of a particular belief, neither for nor against. That is agnostic. Like if someone asks you, is the other side of the moon made of blue cheese? You don't really have any strong opinion on it. Like, I don't know. That's the agnostic position. It's just like, I don't know. Once you do actually dig in your heels a bit and say, no, I don't believe that, then you're no longer an agnostic. Now you're the atheist. Or if you dig your heels in the other way and say, actually, I think there's something there, then you are a theist. So there are those three things. Then there's another position. There's sort of a fourth position that was either invented by my previous professor who passed away or by his professor. Um, and his name was Stanley Jack Odell. He had a fourth position called linguistic agnosticism, which was basically to say that the theological and religious uh, basically saying the way in which we talk about religion and theology and stuff like that is linguistically muddled, meaning it is not very sensible. That was his position um, on most religions. But he said, but he did say, as far as Christianity was as far as Christianity was concerned, he was atheist. But as far as religion in general, he called himself a linguistic agnostic, which was to say that he found the most religious and theological uh, talk to be linguistically muddled or not being very sensible. So I kind of taken his position on that. I'm sympathetic to that. Um, Casey says, was the book Bruce Lee, The Art of Expressing the Human Body? No, I had that book too. I think all of those were written by John Little. He was like an editor who was hired by the Bruce Lee estate by, I think, Linda Lee Caldwell, his ex wife. They hired John Little to be sort of like the Bruce Lee historian, and he wrote a bunch of books about Bruce Lee. One was The Art of Expressing the Human Body. One was the one that I'm talking about was called The Warrior Within. That was the book that I was reading at the time. Casey says, guys, what's the difference between atheist and agnostic? So yeah, so basically I just described it, Casey. So the atheist, the atheism is just the view that it's just the belief that um, the God or gods plural don't exist. Agnosticism, well, religious agnosticism is the view that one doesn't have an opinion one way or another on God's existence. Like you just don't have an opinion on it. You would just be like, oh, I don't know. So I'm atheist. My wife is agnostic, right? Like she doesn't hold any opinion on whether religious faith is what whether God exists or not or anything. So um, then there's a sort of agnosticism that isn't religious. It's just the view. Like, you can be agnostic on any sort of belief system where you can just say I don't know. So that's the difference. Um, if you simply don't hold any opinion on something, you're being agnostic. But atheist is when you say, oh well, is a negative belief. Is when you say something doesn't exist. So that God doesn't exist, and that's atheism. That's the difference. And and then there's theism, the belief that God does exist, and there's many different types of theism. So, Kate Herman's vicious case of lung damage says you can be both, Casey. You cannot be both. That again, that is a misunderstanding of those very terms. You cannot hold an opinion on something and at the same time say that something, then say that that very thing doesn't exist. That would be a contradiction in terms. Just like you can't hold a strong opinion on something and believe it does exist. That's not how it works. You can't be agnostic and believe, and you can't be agnostic and and believe not. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's like either you believe, you disbelieve, or you hold no opinion. If you hold no opinion, you can't also disbelieve. So, Herman, you're wrong. He's saying agnostic is someone who subscribes to the belief that we cannot know or prove the existence of a God or a lack of existence. Atheist is someone who doesn't believe in God. Again, that's false. Agnosticism just means you don't hold an opinion on it. Doesn't mean you can. That doesn't make sense. You can hold a belief in something and not and still also it be the case that you don't know how you can prove that very thing in which you believe. Sort of like a parent can believe their child is good even though they can't prove it because everyone else thinks that child is a damn demon child who needs to be taken out. I mean, yeah, the parent believes the child is good, but they have no way to prove it. They don't know how to prove it. That's my special boy. Yeah, okay. um, on the other hand, uh, you you can disbelieve something and not know how to prove that it doesn't exist because you may not have the conceptual tools to do that very thing. So again, those are two different things. So I think it's a bit muddled what you're saying, and this is often the case when people try to do philosophy who don't have a background in philosophy, when it comes to talking about atheism and agnosticism, because I've seen this online for at least the past, I don't know, 25 years, where people talk so confusingly about atheism and agnosticism. You cannot hold both. You cannot be an agnostic atheist. That doesn't make sense. You can't say you don't hold an opinion on something while also not while also disbelieving in that very thing. It has nothing to do with whether you can prove the existence of something. You're not a scientist. You're not. It does not. You're not a scientist. You're not a philosopher. Um, you're not a theologian. It's not your job to prove or know the existence of something. To like, that's not how it works. Like, I don't have to believe. I don't know how to prove how engineering works to know that I'm currently watching TV right now. That I know that what I'm seeing on the TV screen exists. I don't have to. I don't have to have a background to prove it. Uh, that doesn't make sense. But again, you can't be both. That doesn't. That's it's very. That doesn't. That doesn't make sense. It just when people say you can be both, it just shows they don't know the terms that they're using. Unfortunately. just scrolling down because I think I've answered most of these things I see you guys saying here. John Midget says, just a contrarian, wouldn't your wife be a apathist if she doesn't care much either way? No, again, that is a term that was created online. That's not a real thing. That's not a real thing in philosophy of religion. The so-called apathist. That's not what it means. So let me just quickly just do a breakdown of these terms so that we all can be like we can disagree on things, guys. That's fine, but let's at least agree to the terms that we are using. So at least if we disagree, we know we're disagreeing about the very same things and not disagreeing on things because we are using words differently from each other, right? If we're if if the words we're using um we have different concepts to which those words refer, then we can't have a we can't communicate effectively that way because we're playing in the words of Wittgenstein, we're playing different language games, which is to say that we're we're using we're using different concepts when talking about even though we're using the same words um, to refer to these things. So we're playing different language games. We all need to be playing the same language game, or basically we need to establish the terms that we're using here. That way, this doesn't become muddled. Okay. Um, John Major says you have an outdated definition of agnosticism. I think no. I'm the one with the philosophy degree on the wall. I think I know what I'm talking about, as opposed to people who just make up stuff online. Not saying you made up anything online. I'm saying that people make up different terms online and use these things to describe religion because they have no background in. They've never taken philosophy of religion. They never taken sociology of religion. Uh, they've never taken religious studies or whatever or what have you. So I think it's important to establish our terms here. The Oxford Dictionary terms. So here's the problem with saying let's use the Oxford Dictionary terms. First of all, again, you're talking from ignorance. So since you want to be ignorant, I'm going to be ignorant back. You don't know what you're talking about. First of all, when you're talking about a dictionary, dictionaries give lexical definitions. A lexical definition is just something that is defined by common usage. But in philosophy, ver- we have a much more stringent version of what a definition is. In philosophy, as in mathematics, as in science, we're talking differently when it comes to definitions. In philosophy, a definition is something that has necessary and sufficient conditions for it. It is, in other words, is to say what makes, by virtue of what makes something X. Okay, so and I'm not muted because everyone can hear me in the chat room. You're just being ignorant, and if you continue to do such, I can't really communicate with you, right? So in any case, again, so we're gonna give in the common definitions of these words again. The Oxford Dictionary is one of many dictionaries. We're not going to just conveniently choose one dictionary to your preference. That's completely subjective. Not only that, again, if you know anything about lexicology, lexicologists are the ones who make up dictionaries. Lexical definitions are just things that are defined by common agreement. That's not often how we see definitions in philosophy, much less in science. Again, in philosophy, we define something by its necessary and sufficient conditions, by virtue of what makes something that thing, what constitutes X, by virtue of what. Okay. In any case, so the most common, so the usually a pet definition in philosophy is bachelor. Um, what defines bachelor? An adult unmarried male, right? That is a bachelor. Or what is or a chair? What is a chair? A portable seat for one, right? These are sort of things that we get at when we do philosophical analyses. We want to get at the essence of things, not just something by common agreement. What is defined by common agreement changes over time. So, in any case, the things we're talking about here in philosophy of religion are not new. These things have not changed, and I'm not using any outdated terms. These are just simply what they are. So, a theist is simply someone who believes in God or gods. An atheist is someone who disbelieves in God or gods. An agnostic, someone who holds no opinion of whether God exists. And again, my professor's term that he invented, or his professor invented, linguistic agnostic, which is the view that theological and religious um, scriptures and arguments are linguistically muddled, meaning they aren't very sensible. And then we can break down different types of theism. There, there's monotheism, the belief that there's only one God. There's polytheism, the belief that there's many gods. There's henotheism. Henotheism is the belief that there are many gods, but only one God of your tribe or nation or whatever, which was sort of the earlier view in Judaism, which was the recognition that there were other gods, but there was only one God of the Jewish people. Um, you have pantheism, which is the belief that God is nature. Then you have panentheism, which is the view that God is the sort of the guiding force behind nature. Then there's deism. Deism is the belief that God exists, but he's not immanent in the universe. Like he is sort of like a watchmaker who created the world and let it run on its own afterwards. Um, and there's many other terms, but that I think that is a good start because I don't want this to become um, confusing with a bunch of different terms that I'm gonna throw at you guys. Bubblegum Batty says I subscribe. Thank you, appreciate it. Um, CT says the dictionary is great for clarity, sure, but philosophy is more than just textbook answers about thinking through stuff, questioning ideas, and having those messy, evolving conversations. Yes. So what I'll say is this is why a lot of people dislike philosophy when they take it, well, analytic philosophy. Be- and again, my professor who died, who I keep referencing, Dr. Odell, was a good example of this. People didn't like philosophy after taking it with him because they quickly learned that philosophy is not you just speculating on ideas. That's what a lot of people think, that they can just come to philosophy and just speculate on ideas. No, philosophy contains certain conceptual tools, um, methodology. Um, you have to learn how to use symbolic logic, and you have to learn how to make arguments that are clear, concise, and cogent. If you can't do those things, and if you can't think in nuance, then philosophy is not the right gig for you. Probably go somewhere else. But it's not about speculation. And so there's an exhaustive list of terms that you learn in philosophy. Um, so it's like, and 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 to be fair, some people have criticized analytic or contemporary philosophy for the fact that it has been more aligned with science insofar as having sort of a academic rigor to it, methodology and conceptual tools and terms you have to learn. But this is what happens when you make progress in a certain academic field. It tends to become more rigorous. It tends to have a certain methodology or methodologies that you follow. It tends to have a bunch of jargon that only people within that community know. Which, like I said, by the way, I tend to try to not use a lot of philosophical jargon when I have these talks with you guys. And anytime I do use certain jargon, I always break it down for you, just as I've done a few minutes ago. But again, to I think people get caught up in this agnosticism versus atheism talk just because so many people have been misinformed by stuff that they read online. I guarantee this confusion only comes from people because they've learned this stuff online. This is not something they've had formal training in, any formal education in. Because anyone who has formal education in this is not confused on these basic terms. These are these are like this is like philosophy of religion 101. Like just this talk. Like it can get way more complicated when we start talking about different ideas in the philosophy of religion. CT says no disagreeing on definitions can actually open up the conversation more. Perhaps, yeah. Herman says your professors aren't scientific consensus. Um, what? That's that's a complete red herring because that's not at all what I've even stated. What I said is I'm talking from a point of knowledge. You are not. That the confusion comes from only your only background on this conversation was stuff that you've read online because there's no confusion between simple terms like theism, atheism, and agnosticism to anyone who's taken any sort of course on religious studies. It's simply not. Giant midget says this is just painful. Well, it's not painful. It's painful for you just because you guys are talking from ignorance. Again, I'm trying to be nice. So it's it's like you going to a it's, hmm. It's like you going to a mechanic when you have no knowledge in automotive technology and telling the the mechanic what the problem is against what he's telling you. Like you have no background to say to tell that person one thing or the other just because you googled a few things. No, or it's like the idiot who think he has a litany of medical issues because he went to WebMD instead of actually going to see a doctor who literally has, you know, 8, 12, 20 years background, studying this sort of thing. Like doctor, I think I'm suffering from X, Y, and Z, and the doctor's like, no, no, it's none of that. But doc, I know because I saw this on WebMD. Yeah, oh yeah, okay, sure. I know. I've only taken what 4 years of med school, 4 years of residency, and another 4 years of post residency in this. But yeah, sure, because you went to WebMD. Says, can we agree we know nothing? No. If you literally know nothing, how would you even know that you know nothing? I get you're trying to quote Socrates, but again, people get that quote wrong all the time, and I've actually stated that in previous live streams. That is a misquotation of what Socrates actually said. He didn't say, "For all we know, all I know is that we know nothing." Is that I know nothing. That's not literally what he said. What he actually said was, "If I'm to be, you know, if I am the wisest man in Athens, is only because I don't pretend to know the things that I don't know. Unlike many of these other people who walk around Athens claiming to be smart." So, anyway, all right. So anyway, whoever's leaving, you know, this ain't an airport. You don't have to call out your exit. Because you're too stupid to understand something is not my problem. Again, I'm doing this for free, so if you're not dropping a super chat, I'm not going to sit there and go back and forth with you because you don't understand basic shit. Again, you wouldn't survive one class in analytic philosophy if you think you can tell a professor what terms should be based on what you've learned online. That's not how philosophy works. It's not how logic works. Sorry. Again, philosophy is not speculation. If you think philosophy is just you speculating on shit because you're high, you're wrong. I'm sorry. I'm not going to put it any nicer than that. Just because you're up 2 o'clock in the morning getting high and think now you can talk philosophy is not what philosophers do. Philosophy is based on symbolic logic, on philosophical analysis, and with a study of the natural and social sciences. Sorry. Peace out. Don't let the door handle hit you in the butt on the way out. Casey says we have an educated man, very educated, here helping us understand and taking time to go deep on that answer. He said, not gonna lie, I'm underappreciating the knowledge. That's on me. Well, again, like Sam, man, I don't have any problem like, breaking down something for people to understand. But like I was telling the two numbskulls, a few minutes ago, it was like, we have to come to a common we at least we have to agree on the very terms that we're using if we're gonna talk about a subject. Because like, if I'm if say if we're talking about cars, right? And my idea of a car is, I don't know, a Toyota, and your and your idea of a car is the cyber truck. We might not be having the same ideas about a car, right? So, that's what I'm saying. Casey says I subscribe to my brother. Appreciate it, Casey. Thank you. Junior, the boss says, does this matter in the end? It depends on what you mean by does it matter. My point, my whole point of this particular live stream, which is to say, is religion justified? And people got caught up on just even agreeing on things like theism, atheism, and agnosticism. I'm like, why are we getting caught up on basic terms? It's like if we can't even agree to basic terms, the conversation can't even move along because because these guys want everyone to agree to what they think. And it's like you can't hold subjective views on terms that are pretty well, pretty well defined and have been defined for over like, you know, 1,000 or so years, and then say, well, that's not how I understand these terms. So that doesn't make any sense. So it's like that's on them. Again, I'm not going to sit there and try to debate with someone who gets high at 2 o'clock in the morning and think they can outwit someone who's literally has a background in this very thing. It would be just as asinine as me trying to tell a Wall Street broker, his trade when it comes to the stock market or the bond market, and the only thing I know is the little bit of stuff that I've read. Like, so JR says education is only someone else's wrong facts. No. Again, guys, don't try to sound clever. That's I know everyone wants to try to say something quippy. That's not philosophy is not trying to make some sort of quip that sounds very witty. That's not how philosophy works. We don't have to go down that road. I actually do debate AI, Sandman. I sometimes get into these debates with Google Gemini, and Google Gemini will tell me something, and I will correct it. And it's like, okay, I see your point. And the reason why you can correct Google Gemini is because it's a language based algorithm, so it learns from more interaction with people, and because it has the entire Google database, as part of its platform, you can correct it because when you tell it something, it can instantly engage within that Google database and say, "Oh, okay," and it learns from stuff. So I have actually debated AI. Of course, I think that's like just, of course, Google, debating AI is like mental masturbation because it's like that just really getting you nowhere because you're not all you're doing is help train the all you're doing is help train their language algorithm for free. And it's like if you're going to debate AI and win, by the way, you should be getting paid for it because you're literally just helping them train their AI to be better. So Jared says, I can survive that class. I'll just remain silent and listen to self-important people talk in circles. That's not philosophy. So the cool thing about philosophy classes is like, there's usually like it's not it's not just a for the most part it's just not a dry lecture. Usually, the professor wants you to converse with them, ask them things, even challenge them. However, if you're going to challenge them, know what you're saying before you challenge them, or you will look stupid. The problem is, again, you have people coming into philosophy, usually freshmen or sophomore, who have no background in philosophy, and their idea of philosophy is just that you can just speculate you know, on all sorts of ideas like the sound of one hand clapping and stupid shit like that. And that's not at all how philosophy works, especially in a 101 class. In the philosophy 101 class, more or less, you're just learning the history of philosophy. So there's really no room for you to be like challenging the professor on ideas when you're basically just learning the history of philosophy in a 101 class. Then after history of which by the way, I didn't even take History 101. I My first classes were actually like senior level classes in philosophy, which was sort of by accident, but whatever. Uh, uh, the After I've took this metaphysics class, which used to be for like seniors and beginning grad students, I asked the professor, I was like, well, shouldn't I still take philosophy 101? He was like, well, no, why should you? He's like, you just passed my class, and this used to be a class for seniors and grad students. Like, he's like, you're already prepared to take, you know, more advanced classes. I was like, oh, okay, great. But, for most people, they start with philosophy 101. And again, that's not a class where you debate like most college courses. Is a lecture course. Now, once you get into the higher level philosophy classes, then it's more of a discussion. Like, and when you take like classes like ethics and other sorts of classes, there's more of a discussion. But again, like most academic courses, most of these classes are geared towards a lecture. It's not about you challenging the professor saying, well, what if the sky is actually turquoise? We just think it's blue. Something stupid like that. Like, only people in a one-on-one class do stuff like that because they don't know any better. Once you start taking the classes, you know better. Similar in psychology too. I was a triple major, by the way, if you guys, for those who don't know, because I think everyone in this chat room is no one I've spoken to in the past. So I was a triple major in undergrad, philosophy, psychology, and linguistics. Um, so similar in psychology, like usually when people come to a psych 101 class, they think it's gonna be all about Freud and talking about the unconscious and all this sort of stuff, and then they quickly get disabused of that idea when they realize that most of psychology is based on empirical science, and that most of the stuff that Freud talked about isn't considered very scientific. It's more pseudoscience than anything, and a lot of them, kind of get dismayed, like, "Oh man, I thought this was gonna be about Freud." Like, so it's sort of the same thing, like in philosophy. Like people come to these classes with some, you know, mistaken notions of what they're going to learn. Funny and insightful says philosophy is also abstract and not deterministic or definitive. The first or second philosopher didn't learn nor think or think it as philosophy when they thought about philosophical ideas. False, 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 and false. All of that's wrong. First of all, the first philosopher was Thales of Miletus, and he established philosophy by looking for um, empirical and mechanistic ways to explain natural phenomena instead of looking towards spiritual or religious or mystical ideas. So because of that, Thales of Miletus became the first philosopher, um, and established the Miletian school, which and started a whole trend with the Ionian philosophers of ancient Greece, who were these pre-Socratic philosophers who looked to natural philosophy as a way to explain how the world works. Um, and from that time on, it was all about trying to define things and looking at nature in a deterministic fashion. That's what set it apart from religion and set it apart from mythology. Um, and yes, philosophy can be abstract only insofar as the fact that we're often dealing with um, um, formal. Well, we're often dealing with a conceptual investigation as a as opposed to a more empirical investigation about of the world. When we start investigating things through a more empirical means, that becomes science. All the sciences came from philosophy because once you gained enough body of knowledge within a certain field of philosophy, it stopped being philosophy and became science. So that happened with biology, chemistry, astronomy, you know, geology, psychology, sociology, and so on. Once there was a consistent body of knowledge, those things ceased being philosophy and became science. So again, philosophy is not you just speculating on ideas just because you you have you can't you have to be able to defend, explain, and justify the things that you think. Okay, if you take any when you take any philosophy class and you get an examination on these exams, it's usually going to say, is such and such this or that? Um, say why and justify your answers. Because it's not just about the answer you give, it's also about can you justify having that very opinion. If you can't justify what you're saying or in some way um, defend and reason it, then you're not doing philosophy. You're just spinning your wheels. JS is not trying to sound clever, just real. I mean, uh, well, if you're not trying to sound clever, then I mean that's just false. What education means? Education means you know learning something. Just contrarian one, Skynet zero. Yeah, for now. But the problem with Skynet is Skynet learns from what we teach it, right? Although I don't buy into the the that whole idea of there being a what they call it a single I forgot what you call it, but the whole idea of strong AI becoming so intelligent that it takes over, and I don't really buy into that idea, but that'll take us far too far askew of this conversation to talk about that. JR says science is a study, studies change. Exactly. Science is a study, and science does change, which is why science is the most accurate form of knowledge acquisition we have, is because sci- science has built into it self correction. This sets it apart from religion, as does philosophy, because both philosophy and science are self correcting, whereas religion is not. That's why it's hard to justify religion because it's based on just um, the say so of its leaders and of religious texts that go back hundreds to thousands of years. And you're just going to say, well, this is knowledge because these people said so back then who were baked in the sun for too long. So this is the methodology of science has built into its self correction. This is why it improves. This is why it evolves and knowledge becomes more accurate over time, all other things being equal. But just because things change don't mean that you can challenge everything all at once. You have to you have to be able to stand somewhere, on some foundation on which to change the other things around you. And then once you've done that, then you can step off that foundation and then change that very thing as well. But you don't change everything at once. There's an interesting uh, analogy to that called the Otto boat. He was a, a philosopher in the early 20th century. Um, one of the one of the I guess you can call them the logical empiricists or whatever. But in any case, Otto Neurath believe had there was an analogy made to Otto Neurath saying that, you know, doing philosophy or science for that matter is sort of like being on a boat at sea, um, and as you go along in this boat on the sea, you know, it's gonna it's gonna suffer wear and tear, and so you're gonna have to keep repairing the boat while you're out at sea. But obviously, you can't just repair everything all at once, because if you did, then the boat would sink. Instead, you have to go piece by piece and repair this part, this plank, and this plank, and this plank as you sail across the sea. Because if you try to correct everything at once, then you'll simply sink. And that goes with us, um, building upon our knowledge. Yes, we challenge and question and disbelieve and doubt different sorts of ideas and claims and beliefs, but not all at the same time. We have to have something on which we stand, in which to question and modify those other things that we find to be wrong. Funny and safe says this the definition of definite. Okay, so we're getting way too far astray from what I wanted to talk about, which is philosophy of religion. We can talk about meta philosophy on another day, but again, I I really don't want to talk meta philosophy with people who don't actually have a background in philosophy, because you really have no you 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 really have no authority on which to talk to. And I'm not trying to be mean here, but again, this is like someone who has no background in automotive technology challenging mechanics. Like, you have no point of authority to challenge the mechanic on finer aspects of automotive technology. So I'm just going to move on. J.A.C says religion produces human opinion, God gives facts, science is based on God's creation. Is that what you think, or are you just stating something? I'm not sure what that is. I'm not sure if you're stating I'm not sure if that's something that you think, or you're just putting that out there. I guess the question would be, what do you mean by religion, right? Because religion refers to is an umbrella term for a bunch of different systems of belief, right? So what are we talking about when we say religion produces human opinion? Um, Seemed like it would be sort of the other way around. The diversity in human opinion is why we have so much um, diversity in religious beliefs, because usually religion is tied to certain cultural and historical um, things. So, He said, "Oh, that's what I know." Well, I mean, know is a strong term to use in that sense. But in any case, so um, yeah, I kept it short. I don't want to turn this into religion. No, this is what we're here for. We're talking religion today. It was these other guys who were trying to divert this very uh, conversation away from the discussion, which is religion. Usually, when I have philosophy live streams, I don't want to talk religion, but this one is where I do want to talk religion. So, yeah, so this is actually what we're here for. This one guy wants to talk meta philosophy, and I don't care what his actual credentials are. Like you're 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 distracting from the actual conversation which I was trying to have, which was on religion. So I really don't care what his background is, and obviously whatever background he has in philosophy, he needs to give his money back because he's not that clever in it. If he think I'm bad, again, my professor Dr. Adele would have savaged him because he was a hardcore Wittgensteinian. Ludwig Wittgenstein did not was because he was one of the most clever philosophers ever out there. He didn't tolerate mediocre people in philosophy too well. So I'll just say that. But this conversation wasn't on meta philosophy, which he was trying to change the conversation towards. And I might have kept that conversation going if he was more intelligent in what he was saying, but he's not, whether he actually does have a background in philosophy or not. So we're going to stick to what this was about, which was religion. Um, Again, so you're saying that religion gives rise to human opinion. I think it is that the diversity of human opinion which gives rise to religion. So Diogenes is cool. Some of you guys, some of you guys don't know any contemporary philosophers. Do you? Like we're going back to the ancient philosophers of 3,000 years ago. I mean, yeah, some of them are cool. Diogenes and Socrates and Pliny the Elder and all these other. And I've even mentioned the very first philosopher ever, Thales. But again, uh, the again, sort of like science, when you take analytic philosophy, they kind of just talk about contemporary philosophers. Like they'll talk about the ancient philosophers in history of philosophy courses. Like um, usually we might take like an ancient Greek philosophy class, medieval philosophy, um, modern philosophy. Modern philosophy being around like the 15 and 1600s. Um, or like specific schools of philosophy like existentialism, stoicism, yada yada yada. But contemporary philosophy is usually built on like ideas today, things that are being published today in the journals. Oh no, Sam, man, you're good. I was talking about the guy who was just trying to sound clever. Like we had the guy giant midget, then the other guy, whatever I can't remember his name, that was talking crazy, and then this other guy who thought he who thought his uh his uh textbook fallacies showed somehow showed that I was wrong. And I was kind enough not to call out all his fallacious reasoning. KG says God was created by man. I would probably agree with that. However, like I said, I do believe that religion is a form of self-expression, and that there, I would say, there seems to be uh, a neurological component to religion. There is a neurobiological basis to religion, like across all cultures. people have expressed religious beliefs, and that seems to be because there's a neurobiological basis for religion. Now, does that mean that religion itself is true? Not necessarily. It just means that we're all inclined to look towards religious ideas to explain certain things about the human condition. So, like I said, in every culture, there's religion, right? Jay Valdez says, "What's a lowbrow?" That's it's it's a way of talking about people who seem less educated, less intelligent, or less cultured. That's what lowbrow means. Less erudite, like a caveman. Yeah, lowbrow literally means like like a caveman lowbrow because you think of like Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons with the big heavy brows, lowbrow. Yeah, that's literally like a caveman. Or just like when someone calls someone a troglodyte, like the ancient the ancient animal that you know evolved to become modern crustaceans, troglodytes. When you calling someone a troglodyte, you're saying they're primitive. They're not, get it. So Jay Vetta says, I knew a guy who looked like that once in high school. Think he was on roids. Even that, or he may not just been an attractive guy, or there's well, or he might have suffered from certain conditions. There are certain conditions that can give you that look, but we don't have to go there today. He looked exactly like The Rock. Oh, it might have been Polynesian. I don't know, but anyway, I know one thing: ain't no one challenging him. Same as his Troglodyte is a good song too. I never heard the song, but anyway. So guys, yeah. So my look upon it. So I'm gonna go with again the same professor, Dr. Odell. As you can tell, he's one of my favorite. Excuse me. As you can tell, he's one of my favorite professors. So he said that he sees religion as frozen metaphysics. What does that mean? So yeah, I upload all my live streams, Sandman. So anyone who wants to check this out later can do so. If because some of you might want to go to bed or something and be like, hey, but I wanted to check the rest of that out. Don't worry, I've only deleted one live, I believe, or maybe two since doing this for the past 2 years. And the only reason I deleted those is the one was demonetized because the music playing in the background got it demonetized, so I deleted it for that. But usually I upload all my lives. But okay, so anyway, getting back. So Odell said he saw religion as frozen metaphysics. And he said that because he believed that most religions start off as a way of explaining, you know, why things are the way they are, like metaphysics, right? Like he said, you know, what was once a state of fluid and flowing ideas become frozen because once that teacher or philosopher passes away, all his students sort of codify all his ideas as if they're like the truth or facts, and it becomes stagnant and frozen. Um, he said that's often how philosophy, how religion differs from philosophy. And he also said, this is sort of the difference between Western religion and Eastern religions. As Eastern religion is more fluid than Western religion. Western religion is more based on historical things from thousands of years ago that haven't changed since then, whereas Eastern religion seems to me more fluid in its understanding of things over time, which is why it's sort of there's sort of this overlap between Eastern religion and Eastern philosophy, whereas in the Western world we have a sharp divide between philosophy and religion, because in Western philosophy we tend to look at naturalistic means of explaining nature, whereas our religion takes goes purely spiritual. So, but in Eastern religions, there's usually not this sharp divide between the spiritual and the natural. By the way, can anyone hear the Mozart in the background? I turned it down low so it's not too disturbing, or and won't get me demonetized. Um, that's called classical music for brain power. Mozart, 432 hertz to calm the overthinking mind and recharge, by the YouTube channel Classical Boost. But if you can hear that in the background, then everyone should be able to hear my voice. Moralil says religion is for people who can't accept the void we're all headed for. Mm, not necessarily. I mean, there's again, that's why we have to talk the difference between Western religion and Eastern religion, because not all Eastern religion teaches that there's an afterlife, nor that there's a God. Like, in there's not necessarily a God in some versions of Buddhism, nor in Taoism or Confucianism. Um, More or less, says sleep is forever. We practice death every day. Um, I don't think. Well, so if you mean when you go into the deep stages of sleep where you no longer have uh any unconscious, you have no conscious thought processes, sure, but there are stages of sleep where you're actively thinking and doing stuff, which is doing REM sleep, right? Where you're usually the stage where you're dreaming, having dreaming experiences and stuff like that. Since none of us has been unalive and came back afterwards to talk about it, is really, uh, I really don't know if we can make that claim. But I get what you're saying. But Sam says, "Don't you listen to music more? A little sleep is the cousin of death." Hmm. Sam says, "How do you pull a brain scientist Shifu duck Shifu pull?" I don't get the question. But oh, so how do you pull a brain scientist chick? Like you pull any chick. The gift, you gotta have some game. Helps if you're good looking. That's it. I mean, I've dated professors and psychiatrists, and I'm neither I'm neither a scientist, professor, nor psychiatrist. Um, but I mean, they could tell I was intelligent, so that was cool. And you you pull a female scientist like you pull any female. Like, you're attractive, you have money, and you have confidence and some swag. That's it. But anyway, um, So anyway, so yeah, so that's how I look at religion. Is basically to this. Sorry, my live just froze for a second. But anyway, but yeah, so that's my view of religion generally. Is that it's frozen metaphysics. That a lot of systems of religious belief are, you know, basically these ideas made by very clever people that became matters of fact toward, for their disciples. um, and also the fact that the difference between Western religion and Eastern religion is that Eastern religion is more philosophical, whereas Western religion is more dogmatic, right? Um, there's really not much discussion on different ideas there. When there are different ideas within Western religion, it simply becomes a different. It just ceased to be that religion, becomes something different, which is why we had the age of Reformation, which led to hundreds of years of wars in Europe. I mean, you had the first division within church between um, the the Roman Church that separated from the Orthodox Church on the ideas of the papacy, not to mention separated from the Coptic Church and the Gnostics as far as their ideas on the very basic concepts of Christ and all of that. Then later on, you had the further division, the great, I think, what the Great Schism, I think it's called, when Martin Luther decided to nail on the to nail his arguments on the church doors, saying this is not how you do this. This is how you do it. And by the way, we're no longer using the Latin Bible. We're going to use the English Bible, and we're going to break it down so that people can actually understand what we're talking about. So, well, actually, it wasn't in English because he's German, but you get what I'm saying. The Great Schism. So that led to what 100 or so years of war in Europe. Then even after that, even within even within the Protestant tradition created by Martin Luther, you had all these different ideas. You had yeah, you had the Lutheran Church, but then again, the Catholic Church and the Protestants divided in England over King Henry because he wanted to fuck who he wanted to fuck. And he's like, I want to get divorced. Catholic Church is like, no, you can't get divorced. He's like, well, I'm going to get divorced. If you tell me I can't get divorced, I'm just going to start my own church. So he started the Church of England. Said, you, 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 you're cool. And fuck you. Who next? He established the Anglican Church with with the I guess with the Archdiocese of Canterbury being ahead of the king being ahead of the Church of England, but the Arch whatever of Canterbury being the actual leader of the church. Um, and then that further divided within the Church of England because you had the Calvinists who was like, no, no, you guys are getting it wrong too. So the Calvinists are like, all right, peace, we're out, we're going to Sweden or wherever, and they bounced to Sweden or what other parts of Scandinavia, and it was like, guys, let's go to America. Word, all right, let's go to America. And so they established. So you had the Pilgrims come there, who almost who almost died because most of these were a bunch of elitists who've never done actual like farm work, much less hunting and gathering. Until they had these indigenous people actually help them out from dying out. And then if you thought the Pilgrims were bad, then their other Calvinist cousins, the Puritans, came along and was like, yeah, you guys are too moderate for us. We need to kick it up a notch. so so you had an even more extremist group than the Pilgrims come over, who are both also Calvinists. So it's like That's the problem with Western religion is like unlike Eastern religion where ideas can flow and crash and still stay the same religion because Western religion is so dogmatic. Anytime you have a different idea, it just becomes a different denomination of that faith or an entirely different religion altogether. So then you had people, then you had the people who were like these church going folks, whether they were Anglicans or Calvinists or whomever in America. They was like, guys, you know what? We think that these native folks, these folks were actually the lost tribes of Israel, but they were sent here because they were cursed because they rejected the, the real faith. So then, which led to the Mormons. So we could keep going and going and going. Like so, every time there's a different idea, it ceases being that very religion and becomes a different religion. So, but anyway, so that again, there. I mean, there are different ideas in Eastern religion too, but usually it's not because people had different ideas that that the religion just became a fundamentally different sect. Like sometimes that did happen. This is why you have the difference between what Theravada Buddhism and I forgot the two main different versions of Buddhism, Little Boat and Big Boat Buddhism. I forget the names, but then even within that, then you had the rise of Chan Buddhism, which became Zen Buddhism in Japan, which then blended with Japan's native religion, Shintoism, just as Buddhism in China blended with the folk beliefs there, like blended with ideas of Taoism and Confucianism and ancestor worship. Or you had the rise of, or just like you had coming out of West Africa, going into the Caribbean and West Indies, people who had these uh, African religions which blended in with Catholicism, um, religions like the Igbo and other African religions which blended into Catholicism and in the Caribbean became gave rise to things like voodoo and Santeria, stuff like that. So, but in any case, my point being is that in Western religion, things are very dogmatic, which is why my professor referred to it as frozen metaphysics. And like I said, anytime a different set of ideas arise within Western religions, they cease being their religion, become a whole different thing. Thanks, Sam, man. I appreciate that. He said, "Man, you deserve more subscribers on YouTube." I'm looking to be at 10,000 subs by the end of this year, hopefully. But that's sort of on me to make more efforts in that vein as well, right? So that that's the onus is on me for that to happen. But it would help if you guys also like and subscribe and share the videos. That will help me towards achieving that. That way, I can afford to buy a Big Mac and fries every once in a while, and maybe some fruit snacks. So get some new sneakers to run in. But but yeah, he's I love Big Mac. Funny. But yeah, so um again, and I've had this debate with my own father. Like he tried to argue that Egyptology was ancient philosophy, and that the Greeks stole Greek philosophy from the ancient Egyptians. This is a common belief amongst people who subscribe to the revisionist history called Afrocentrism. They have this whole idea that that Western um, society, particularly that of philosophy and science, was stolen from ancient Egypt. When it's actually the other way around. Like a lot of the Greeks um, came to Egypt and spread their ideas there, not the other way around. That the ancient Egyptians came to ancient Greece and Rome and spread their ideas. Lord Calvin says there's no evidence that the Greeks stole ideas from Egypt or Africa. Oh no, I agree. I'm saying within the a certain set of black people, they have this notion which is called Afrocentrism, which was very popular in the 80s and 90s. Um, because I used to be an adherent of these ideas, which I rejected once going to college. But so my father was arguing, yeah, this comes from such and such, and I was like, no, Dad, that's. I was like, yes, those ideas are. I was like, yes, and I would tell my dad, yeah, yeah, those ideas predate Greek philosophy, but those ideas you're talking about aren't philosophy. These are just religious ideas. He was like, well, no, 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 this is philosophy because look at this and this. And I at some point I was just like, sure, whatever you say, because I was gonna just at one point I was just tempted to say, I'm the one who studied philosophy, not you. You thought philosophy was a waste of time. I was like, you need to stick to what you're good at, which is accounting or tax law, stuff like that. That's what you're good at. You don't know philosophy. Um, and so like I was, I didn't want to get into it with him because he wasn't he. Okay, one lesson you should know from critical thinking: if you learn nothing about critical thinking skills, you should know this: reason only, reason only with those who can reason. I'll say that again: reason only with those who can reason. If not, you're gonna waste your time. Which is why I started to ignore the people in my chat in the chat room earlier on because they were talking some rather uh, they were making claims that they couldn't support, and it just became obvious that they didn't have the the, the intellectual capacity to even justify what they were saying, to put it nicely. The allegory of the cave. Um, sure. Can you give me a like and a subscribe, and I'll be more than happy to do so. Since that wasn't what the topic is, but I can quickly go over that really quickly. But yeah, so in any case, like I wanted to tell my father, but again, it was a waste of time since he was all on. By the way, he's also one of these guys who believes that that, that the pyramids were created by aliens. So this tells you sort of the kind of person that I'm talking to here. He believes that again, the that Western society and Greek philosophy and modern science were all stolen from the ancient Egyptians, who were all black, by the way, ancient Egyptians have never, even though Egyptians has never been black, and I've dated one. She was a hot little Arabic girl. But anyway, um, he's also one of these people who believe that the ancient Egyptians didn't build the pyramids that aliens did. So this kind of gives you a kind of a clue to the caliber of his level of thinking. Just saying. So anywho, so I think oh yeah, so Lord Calvin asked to explain the allegory of the cave. Plato's cave allegory refers to, so he says, imagine like people who grew up their whole lives in a cave, in a dark dank cave, right? And you see these images on the wall cast from the light into the cave, giving rise to these shadows on the wall. And so because you never ventured outside of the cave, you think that these shadows playing upon the wall are real, until one of you goes outside to explore outside the cave. You're like, wait, what? So those things we saw on the wall were just like images cast by light and shadows. That's awesome. That's cool. So you go back and try to tell the cave dwellers, the, the cave dwellers back in the cave, hey guys, this stuff we've been looking at all this time isn't real, right? These are just like images on the wall. They was like, man, what the hell are you talking about? You've been you've been eating some bad mutton or something. This stuff is real. What you talking about, bro? They like, and he's like, and the guy's trying to explain to him, no, man, these are just images on a wall cast by the light into the dark onto the shadows. And so they're not trying to hear it. um, and this gave rise to some of the Platonic ideas about um, the, the world of ideas. And I don't want to go too far into that, but Plato believed that there was a there was sort of a independent existence that went beyond the world, which was the ideal world, the world of ideas or whatever, where we get the most truest notion of all of our concepts. Like what is, like when we ask what is love, what is truth, what is knowledge, what is justice, like all these things exist independently of our world in this world of ideas, and that we can only get these crude impressions of these very things, like the images on the wall for the cave dwellers. Like they only see these images cast on the wall and they think they're the real thing. They don't realize these are just crude impressions on the wall given by shadows on actual things existing outside of the cave. So anyway, and no, I'm not shouting out anyone's YouTube channel. If you went to any other streamer, you're gonna drop. You have to drop a super chat for them to even recognize you. So don't even ask me. You're not gonna get it for free here either. Sandman says you're a smart, logical guy. What do you think of advanced ancient ancestors? What do you mean by advanced ancient ancestors? That's that's my question. Tries says no. This is an Egyptian Afrocentrism idealism. I have no idea what you mean by that. Caesar, which I agree to some degree. Calvin says thanks. You're welcome. Get some water here. It's 2:39 by my watch, so I'm about to go pretty soon. So I'm about to wrap this up. But Sandman, what do you mean by advanced ancient ancestors? Possibly an alien form of Egyptians, which Egyptians are our ancestors, but some people believe they resemble something like aliens. Well, I don't know what you mean by our ancestors. If you mean black people Black American people aren't descended from Egyptians. We descended from the people of the coast of West and Central Africa, from which they were taken. Um, so I always laugh when I hear Black people try to claim, ancestry to ancient Egyptians. First of all, because they weren't Black, and even if they were Black, it wouldn't matter because we weren't taken from from that part of the from that part of the world. So, um, as far as ancient aliens, there's really no evidence to that. That would kind of be a argument to ignorance to claim, well, if we don't know something, then it's possibly true. That's not a good argument. That's a uh, fallacious argument to argue that something is either true or not true based on our ignorance of that very thing. Um, I mean, maybe for people who like watching Discovery Channel, they might find that convincing with the guy with the zany hair saying, "I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens." Like that guy, like he's made a whole career off that, which is hilarious, by the way. Like he knows how retarded he sounds, but he made a whole career out of that, which is just hilarious that people like people find him entertaining. But uh if that's if that's what um but if that's what you mean by by advanced ancestors, yeah, that's kind of zany. Calvin says, I enjoyed your talk. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Is it kind of like ancient aliens, but without aliens like Atlantis type stuff? I got so that well again, none of that really checks out because oh, sorry, I'm scanning the chat for who said that because I try to. Oh, Sandman asked that. Oh, so you are talking ancient aliens. So yeah, I don't believe in ancient aliens because there's literally no evidence today we've contacted ancient aliens. Two is history has already described how the Egyptians built the pyramids, which is like I said, I think my father's retarded for him being that educated and thinking something so stupid that aliens built the pyramids and not the ancient Egyptians themselves. Especially when the pyramids aren't even that unique. If you go to most, you can go across the world and there are pyramid-like structures all over the place. There are the mounds of Cahokia here in North America, which were a group of pre pre Columbus Native Americans who gave rise to people like the Cherokee and the Choctaw and all those sort of folks. Um, but they were a group called the Cahokia Empire, and they had big mound type temples or whatever buildings. So did the Mayans, so did the Aztecs, so did these people in ancient Turkey and the Tepi and some uh, area I think called Tepi or something like that. Um, Also in China as well, we see mount like pyramid like structures. So this was not a unique thing that happened in Egypt. It was a quite common way to build upon things, to build it in a pyramid like shape. So because we see it across different cultures, there's no reason to suspect this was done by aliens. Not to mention we have no evidence that there has ever been aliens here because you know people have it's hard to keep such secrets for a long time amongst people. After a while, things will get exposed, right? As far as Atlantis wasn't real either. Atlantis was literally just a homily. It's literally just a story invented by Plato to teach a moral story about about society and the corruption of society. That was Plato. Plato wasn't talking actual history. He made up the whole idea of Atlantis based on talking about, you know, what the about utopia and the perfect society, and, you know, moral and political corruption, stuff like that. That was that came from Plato, but it wasn't an actual place. Even though historians have gone out of their way to try to discover this place, at best, we seem to have found some sort of Minoan civilization, um, related to the people who ended up, um, establishing Crete, the city state of Crete. There was a, a Minoan civilization that may have been the inspiration for Plato's idea on Atlantis, but there literally was never an Atlantis. So, guys, for anyone just coming into the chat, I'm actually about to go, but this discussion was loosely just late night philosophy, just kind of chopping it up, talking about religion and whether it can be justified. And one of the last things I need to say is when I say justify, I should clarify what we mean by justification, because there's actually three different ways you can give justification for something. There's, um, in philosophy, so you have rational justification, which means that you are giving, like, an empirical, you giving some sort of empirical evidence, as well as some sort of, some sort of, logical argumentation for something, for some claim or claims. That would be a rational justification. Um, then you have more of a, psychological explanation or justification, which is based on explaining why people believe the things they believe, on why they behave in certain ways. That's sort of the the psychological or scientific explanation of something, right? And then lastly you have the social justification, which is based on, like, you know, certain ideas in society, or, you know, people's upbringing, stuff like that. So in that context, can we say religion is justified? I, and I think we can give a social justification for religion, obviously, right? we see we see that, um, we uh, we see, across cultures, that everyone shares religious beliefs, and that it often gives a foundation for that society and its culture, right? So you can definitely give some sort of social justification for religion. I think you can also give a psychological explanation for religion, because there is a psychology of religion. Again, we know that there's a neurological basis, excuse me, a neurobiological basis for religion. That basically, that's to say that we all evolved to experience, certain religious things. So there's a neurobiological component to religion. So I guess we can also give some sort of psychological explanation to religion as well. Now the last one comes sort of at the highest standard, a rational justification. Can we give a rational justification for religion? Mm, that I'm not too sure of. In a historical context, yes, we could say, well, in ancient times, religion was sort of the best way to explain how the world works. And it sort of evolved. Like it evolved from, again, I'm going back to my professor, Dr. Odell, who I've been mentioning throughout this whole chat. So, so early on, it was sort of the idea that there were spirits that existed in everything. There were spirits in the ground, spirits in the trees, spirits in the rocks, spirits, you know, in up there in the sky. There were spirits in the mountains. There were spirits, in the sea. So there was sort of that sort of animistic religion, religious belief, which then gave rise to, well, instead of the animistic belief that there's just everything is everything is infested with spirits, is just to say no, but no, there's gods that create, that control different aspects of nature. So it goes from animistic belief to a polytheistic belief. Then from there it evolves even more and say, well, yeah, there may be different gods, but there's only our God that controls this responsible for our people. Our people have but one God. That's henotheism, which was how uh, the early Israelites were. They were a henotheistic people who accepted that there were other gods, but there was only a god, one God of their people, of their tribe. And then it came along a clever person in Egypt. So shout out to Egypt again. Um, and this was the Pharaoh Akhenaten, uh, the third or the fourth. Akhenaten decided to go away with all the Egyptian gods and say there's only one God, Atan, the sun god. Atan meant the sun god, and he changed his original pharaonic name to Akhenaten. He changed his son's name. Uh, well, no. Well, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But anyway, he invented the idea that there was but one God. He invented the idea of monotheism. So this was an evolution of of thought and how to explain nature. It went from the belief that everything that exists had spirits dwelling within them, to the idea that all the all the governing forces of nature were controlled by the gods, or the gods themselves, to the idea that um, there may be different gods, but um, you know, only one God exists for a certain people. That if you're the chosen people, you have only but one God. And then you had the monotheism created by Akhenaten, who said there's only but one God, right? And then you you go to saying, well, um, maybe there aren't gods. Maybe these there are these governing forces of nature, but maybe they just work in a mechanistic way. And that's when we have philosophy. When we said, okay, let's whether there are gods or whether there aren't gods, let's find explanations for how these things work in a mechanistic way. Like, what is the mechanism behind why things fall to the ground, why the seasons change, why we can see certain stars and planets at some times of the year and not during other times of the year. So so within the historical context, there is some rational justification, but as soon as we got to a point where we got when we went from ancient philosophy to modern philosophy, it seemed it seemed more dubious that we could rationally justify um, belief in organized religion. Again, we can give a social justification for religion, and we can give a psychological explanation for why there's religion, but the rational justification is lacking. So that's where I'll leave it on that. Uh, Same as like the History Channel after 1 a.m. I'm pretty sure they play a lot of zany stuff on History Channel. History Channel hasn't been very good since the 90s. Does the all those Discovery, all those channels owned by Discovery, which now bought out Warner Brothers, but whatever. All those channels by Discovery, like they stopped being educational in the 90s. Like they were more for entertainment than education. The only thing that's still good on the Discovery channels are like Shark Week. That's like the only thing that's still scientific, and even that is more still entertainment. Tribe said may have not been Egyptian, but definitely we came from Africa, all of us. Oh yeah, yeah, I'd never disagree with that. I was saying Afrocentrists had this idea that they had very zany ideas, which was what it was revisionist history. Just going down the chat, just going down the chat, guys. Before I end this, I've actually talked about Freemasonry before, Sandman. You can check out my older streams. Last year I did a whole talk on um, different ideas arising out of speculative um, metaphysics and um, ideas that might be considered extra scientific or occult or paranormal. So I did several live streams on paranormal ideas. So I've addressed Freemasonry there. Thank you for everyone who liked this up. Thank you, Chris Domino. All right, so came to the end of the chat room. Yeshua, you sound kind of schizophrenic there, brother. I think you need to stay off whatever you're on and get a good night's rest, which is what I'm going to do. So, guys, it's been good. If you have any other questions, you can leave it in the comment section once this live is uploaded. People who are watching this broadcast on replay, if you have any questions, again, leave it in the comment section. Please leave me a like, share, and subscribe. If you feel if you maybe learned something or were entertained, maybe send me a super thanks or a cash app. The link will be in the description, or you can leave me a buy me a coffee. So, um, in any case, I'm out. Um, have a good one, guys.